Have you ever made a drunken mistake that completely derailed your life? One silly dare at an upscale downtown bar turned a regular Friday night into a terrifying game of survival. She kissed a stranger for a laugh. She didn't know that stranger ran the city's most ruthless crime syndicate. The air inside the Obsidian Club was thick with the scent of expensive Tom Ford cologne, aged bourbon, and quiet, dangerous money. Harper Evans, a 26-year-old junior financial analyst who barely made rent on her tiny Brooklyn apartment, had no business being in a place like this. Her presence was entirely the fault of her best friend, Chloe, who had somehow charmed a bouncer into letting them access the VIP lounge to celebrate Harper's recent, grueling promotion. "You are way too tense for someone who just got a 15% raise," Chloe shouted over the low, thumping bass of the lounge's sound system. She shoved a crystal tumbler of amber liquid into Harper's hand. "Drink, and then we are playing a game. You need to do something reckless, Harper. You've been living like a nun who only reads spreadsheets." Harper took a sip of the bourbon, coughing as the liquid fire burned down her throat. "I'm not tense. I'm just out of my element. Look around, Chloe. Everyone here is wearing watches that cost more than my student loans." "Exactly," Chloe grinned, her eyes sparkling with vodka-fueled mischief. "Which makes this the perfect hunting ground. Truth or dare, Harper. And since I know your truths are painfully boring, you're taking a dare." Harper rolled her eyes, leaning back against the velvet cushions of their booth. "Fine. Give me your worst." Chloe scanned the dimly lit room, her gaze sweeping past minor celebrities and Wall Street types until it landed on a secluded, elevated booth in the far corner. The area was cordoned off by a thick velvet rope, and the shadows seemed to intentionally cling to it. "Him," Chloe said, pointing a manicured finger. Harper followed her gaze. Sitting in the center of the booth was a man who commanded the room without making a single sound. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that screamed bespoke Italian craftsmanship. His face was a study in sharp angles, a harsh jawline, a straight aristocratic nose, and eyes so dark they looked like endless voids, even in the dim light. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't drinking. He was just watching the room with a cold, terrifying level of calculation. Flanking his booth were three massive men in dark suits who stood with the rigid, hyper-aware posture of military contractors. "Absolutely not," Harper breathed, her stomach plummeting. "Chloe, look at him. He looks like he fires people for breathing too loudly. He's the most serious, intimidating man in this entire city. I'm not going over there." "That's exactly why you have to," Chloe insisted, leaning in close. "I dare you, Harper Evans, to walk past those human mountains, sit in that man's lap and kiss him. A real kiss, not a peck on the cheek. You're insane. They'll throw me out before I get within 10 feet of him." "Then you fail the dare, and you have to pay for our entire tab tonight," Chloe challenged, knowing full well the tab was already pushing $500. The combination of the expensive bourbon, the exhaustion of an 80-hour work week, and Chloe's taunt sparked a sudden, uncharacteristic defiance in Harper's chest. She had spent her entire life playing it safe. She followed the rules, kept her head down, and blended in. Just once, she wanted to do something completely unhinged. "Hold my drink," Harper said, her voice trembling only slightly. She stood up, smoothing down her simple black slip dress, and began the long walk across the lounge. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs, roaring in her ears. As she approached the velvet rope, the three massive men instantly shifted, their stances widening. One of them, a man with a jagged scar across his neck, stepped directly into her path. "Private area, miss. Turn around," the scarred man rumbled, his voice like gravel. Harper froze, ready to apologize and retreat. But before she could speak, a low, smooth voice drifted from the booth. "Let her through, Tommy." The bodyguard hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping aside and unclipping the velvet rope. Harper's breath caught. She stepped into the elevated booth, the heavy silence immediately swallowing the background noise of the club. The man looked up at her. Up close, he was devastatingly handsome, but the coldness in his eyes was paralyzing. He didn't ask what she wanted. He simply waited, his gaze tracing the lines of her face with analytical precision. I'm sorry to intrude," Harper stammered, her sudden bravery evaporating. "I'm losing a bet." "Are you?" he asked. His voice was a quiet baritone, completely stripped of warmth. "And what does this bet entail?" Before she could lose her nerve entirely, Harper stepped forward, straddled his knees, and sat directly on his lap. The man didn't flinch. He didn't push her away. His large, warm hands instinctively came up to rest lightly on her waist, securing her, but his expression remained a mask of stone. "This," she whispered. Harper leaned down and pressed her lips to his. She expected him to pull away, to call his guards, to be repulsed. Instead, the moment her lips touched his, the air in the booth seemed to ignite. After a second of rigid surprise, his hands tightened painfully on her waist. One hand slid up her back, tangling in her hair, and he kissed her back. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was possessive, demanding, and utterly consuming. He tasted like expensive scotch and peppermint, and for a few breathless seconds, Harper completely forgot where she was, who she was, and the dare that brought her there. She melted against him, her hands coming up to grip the lapels of his immaculate suit. When he finally broke the kiss, Harper was dizzy, her chest heaving. She opened her eyes to find him staring at her, the coldness in his dark eyes now replaced by a burning, terrifying intensity. She scrambled off his lap, her face flushed crimson. Thank you. Sorry." As she turned to flee, his hand shot out, his long fingers wrapping like a steel vice around her wrist. He pulled her back just enough so he could speak directly into her ear. "You shouldn't play games with things you don't understand, little bird," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. "I'll see you very soon." He released her. Harper didn't look back. She practically ran across the club, grabbed Chloe by the arm, and dragged her out into the freezing New York night, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and absolute terror. The paranoia began the very next morning. Harper woke up in her cramped apartment with a pounding headache and the lingering phantom sensation of the stranger's hands on her waist. She tried to brush the entire night off as a hazy, alcohol-induced mistake. But as she walked to the subway, she couldn't shake the prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the distinct, primal feeling of being watched. When she arrived at her desk at Pinnacle Financial, an elite wealth management firm in Midtown, she found a single perfect black dahlia resting on her keyboard. There was no note. "Who sent the funeral flower?" her co-worker David asked, peering over his cubicle. "I don't know," Harper muttered, tossing it quickly into the trash bin. Must be a mix-up. But the feeling of being hunted escalated over the next 3 days. She started noticing the same vehicle everywhere she went, a heavily tinted, matte black Cadillac Escalade. It was parked across the street from her apartment complex. It trailed 2 cars behind her Uber. It idled outside her favorite coffee shop. By Thursday afternoon, Harper was practically vibrating with anxiety. She decided to skip her lunch break and stay in the safety of the glass-walled Pinnacle office. Her boss, Richard Sterling, a nervous, sweaty man who always seemed to be cooking the books, called her into his office. Harper, I need you to run these offshore accounts again, Richard demanded, aggressively sliding a thick manila folder across his mahogany desk. And scrub the routing numbers from the Cayman transfers. Quickly, before the end of the day. Harper frowned, opening the file. Mr. Sterling, I told you last week, these transfers don't match the client's declared income. If I scrub the routing numbers, it's a direct violation of SEC regulations. It looks like money laundering. Richard's face drained of color, and he slammed his hands on the desk. You don't ask questions, Evans. You do exactly what I tell you, or I swear to God, you'll be blacklisted from every financial institution on the East Coast. Harper backed out of the office, clutching the folder, her hands trembling. She knew her firm was shady, but she desperately needed the job to pay off her mother's medical debts. At 6 p.m., the office was mostly empty. Harper gathered her things, exhausted and defeated. She took the elevator down to the underground parking garage, her footsteps echoing loudly against the concrete. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, menacing shadows. As she reached the doors leading to the street level, 2 large men stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, blocking her path. Harper's blood ran cold. One of them was the man with the jagged neck scar from the club. Tommy. Miss Evans, Tommy said gruffly. The boss wants a word. I'm calling the police, Harper said, fumbling blindly in her purse for her phone. I wouldn't do that, Harper. A smooth, baritone voice echoed through the garage. Footsteps approached from the shadows. The man from the bar, the stranger she had kissed, stepped into the dim light. He looked just as impeccably tailored and utterly terrifying as he had at the Obsidian. But this time, the danger wasn't contained behind a velvet rope. It was right in front of her. Who are you? Harper whispered, backing up until her shoulders hit the cold steel of the elevator doors. Why are you following me? My name is Silas Castellano, he said, stopping a few feet away from her. He slipped his hands casually into his pockets, though his eyes never left hers. The name hit Harper like a physical blow. The Castellano family. Everyone in the city had heard whispers of the name. They were the invisible hand that controlled the ports, the unions, and the underground casinos. They weren't just criminals. They were corporate, organized, and utterly ruthless. You're a mobster, she choked out. A dark, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. I prefer businessman. But yes, and you, Harper Evans, have managed to place yourself right in the middle of my business. I don't know what you're talking about. I just kissed you on a dare. I'm sorry, okay? I'll never go back to that club. Silas stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a shadow over her. This has nothing to do with the kiss, little bird, though I admit that was a bold introduction. This is about your boss, Richard Sterling, and the folder you're clutching to your chest. Harper looked down at the manila folder she had brought down with her to review at home. Richard Sterling is laundering money for the Volkov syndicate. The Russians, Silas explained, his voice low and lethal. They are my competitors. Sterling has been hiding their money in the very offshore accounts he just asked you to scrub. Harper's mind raced, panic setting in. I didn't know. I just crunch numbers, I swear. I know, Silas said, reaching out. He gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the warmth of his fingers contrasting wildly with the ice in his eyes. I've had my men watching you since Friday. I know everything about you, Harper. I know you work 80 hours a week. I know you're drowning in medical debt for a mother who passed away last year. And I know you're too smart to go down for Sterling's crimes. What do you want from me? She breathed, terrified by his proximity. The Volkovs are coming for Sterling tonight. They know he's been skimming off the top, Silas stated plainly. If you go back to work tomorrow, The FBI will be there, and you will be implicated as his accomplice. Or worse, the Russians will find you to tie up loose ends. Harper's knees threatened to give out. Oh my God. I can protect you, Silas said, his gaze dropping momentarily to her lips before meeting her eyes again. But in exchange, I need you to decode Sterling's ledgers for me. I need to know exactly where the Volkovs are hiding their capital. You want me to work for the Mafia? She gasped. I want you to survive, Silas corrected smoothly. And I want you. Before Harper could process the weight of his words, the screeching of tires echoed down the ramp of the parking garage. 2 silver SUVs smashed through the security gate, speeding violently toward them. Silas's demeanor shifted instantly from calm predator to violent protector. He grabbed Harper by the waist, lifting her entirely off her feet as he dragged her behind a massive concrete pillar. Gunfire erupted, the deafening sound of automatic weapons echoing off the concrete walls. Sparks flew as bullets chewed through the plaster where Harper had been standing a second before. "Tommy, get the car!" Silas roared over the chaos, pressing Harper flat against his chest, shielding her body with his own. Harper squeezed her eyes shut, screaming over the noise. She felt the heavy, rhythmic thud of Silas's heart against her cheek. He wasn't panicking. He pulled a heavy, matte black handgun from a shoulder holster beneath his suit jacket. "Harper, look at me," Silas commanded, his voice slicing through her panic. She opened her terrified eyes. "You belong to me now. Do you understand? I am getting you out of here. But your old life is dead." As another round of bullets shattered the windshield of a nearby car, Harper realized with chilling clarity. The dare hadn't just been a mistake. It had been a fatal trap, and the door to her normal life had just violently slammed shut. The matte black Escalade tore down the FDR drive, weaving violently through the sparse nighttime traffic. Harper sat paralyzed in the back seat, the deafening roar of the parking garage shootout still echoing in her skull. Beside her, Silas Castellano was eerily calm. He was tapping out a rapid message on an encrypted satellite phone, his breathing steady, his expensive suit entirely unruffled by the fact that they had just narrowly escaped a heavy arms execution. "Tommy," Silas said, his voice cutting through the tense silence of the cabin. "Route us to the Alpine property, put the Tribeca penthouse on lockdown, and scrub the footage at Pinnacle Financial. The Volkovs just declared a street war over a cowardly accountant." Harper hugged her knees to her chest, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Where are we going? You said you were getting me out of there." Silas finally looked up from his phone, his dark eyes softening just a fraction as they locked onto her terrified face. "I am. But going to your apartment or the police is a death sentence. The Volkov Syndicate, led by a man named Viktor Volkov, is ruthless. If they went through the trouble of hitting a midtown parking garage, it means they already know Sterling was using you." They crossed the George Washington Bridge, leaving the glittering skyline of Manhattan behind, and drove deep into the ultra-exclusive, heavily wooded enclaves of Alpine, New Jersey. The car finally slowed, turning down a private, unmarked road that led to massive, wrought-iron security gates. The gates swung open silently, revealing a sprawling, modern fortress made of glass, steel, and dark stone, surrounded by acres of dense, protective forest. "Welcome to your new office, Miss Evans," Silas murmured, as the car parked in a subterranean garage filled with a fleet of identical armored SUVs, a classic Aston Martin, and a handful of armed guards. Harper was escorted up to the main level. The house was breathtaking, decorated with minimalist perfection and priceless art, but the sheer number of security cameras and men in dark clothing reminded her that this was a gilded cage. Silas led her into a massive study, One entire wall was covered in high-resolution monitors displaying financial tickers, global news feeds, and live surveillance feeds. "Sit," Silas commanded gently, pulling out a leather chair in front of a heavy mahogany desk. He placed the crumpled manila folder she had rescued from her office in front of her. "My tech team, led by Leo over there, has already mirrored Pinnacle's servers. I need to know exactly what Richard Sterling did with the Volkov's $50 million. Harper swallowed hard, her professional instincts fighting through her paralyzing fear. She opened the folder and logged into the secured laptop Leo provided. For the next 3 hours, the room was silent except for the frantic clicking of Harper's keyboard. Silas never left her side. He stood behind her chair, a silent, imposing guardian, watching the complex web of numbers and Cayman Island routing codes dance across the screen. Suddenly, Harper gasped, her blood running completely cold. She pushed away from the desk, her hands flying to her mouth. "What is it?" Silas demanded, his posture instantly rigid. "Oh my God, Sterling, he didn't just launder the money. He stole it," Harper whispered, her voice cracking with terror. "He set up a dummy shell corporation in the British Virgin Islands. He funneled the Volkov's $50 million there, completely bypassing your accounts." Silas's jaw clenched, a dangerous muscle ticking in his cheek. And, Harper choked out, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "He didn't use his own digital signature to authorize the final transfer. He used my employee identification number. He bypassed the two-factor authentication using the reports I ran for him last week. To the Volkovs, the digital trail doesn't lead to Richard Sterling. It leads directly to me. I stole the Mafia's money." The silence in the room was absolute. Even Leo, the stoic tech expert, stopped typing. Harper buried her face in her hands, a sob tearing from her throat. She was a dead woman. "Hey." Silas's voice was suddenly right beside her ear. He knelt beside her chair, gripping her wrists and gently pulling her hands away from her face. His dark eyes were blazing with a terrifying, violent light, but his touch was incredibly gentle. "Look at me, Harper." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I told you in that parking garage that you belong to me now," Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly vow that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "I don't lose what is mine. Viktor Volkov will not touch a single hair on your head. I will burn his entire syndicate to ash before I let him near you." Harper stared at him, completely captivated by the raw, unfiltered possessiveness in his eyes. He wasn't just a cold, calculating boss. There was a raging fire beneath the ice. Without thinking, she reached out, her trembling fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. Silas closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, leaning into her touch. "Why are you doing this for me?" she whispered. "I'm just a mistake from a bar." Silas opened his eyes, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Because the moment you sat on my lap and kissed me, you ruined me for anyone else. You were fearless, little bird. Now, it's my turn to be fearless for you." He leaned in and kissed her. It was deeper, more desperate than their first encounter at the Obsidian. It was a kiss that sealed a dangerous pact, a promise of violence and protection that bound her to the underworld forever. Harper barely slept. When the morning sun finally broke over the New Jersey tree line, it brought no comfort. She was sitting in the massive kitchen, clutching a mug of black coffee, when her personal cell phone, which Leo had supposedly scrubbed and secured, began to ring. The caller ID was blocked. Silas froze, nodding at Harper. "Answer it." "Put it on speaker." "Harper Evans," a heavily accented, terrifyingly cheerful voice crackled through the speaker. "You have been a very difficult woman to track down." "Victor," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, radiating pure malice. Ah, Silas Castellano, listen carefully. Your brilliant little analyst stole $50 million from my family. I want it back. She didn't steal your money, Victor. Sterling framed her, Silas replied coldly. I don't care about Sterling, Victor roared, dropping his cheerful facade. The digital footprint points to the girl, and since she is hiding behind your walls, I had to find alternative leverage. A muffled, terrified sob echoed through the phone. Harper's heart stopped. Harper, help me! They grabbed me outside my apartment! Chloe's voice screamed before being violently silenced. Chloe! Harper shrieked, surging out of her chair. You have 2 hours, Victor snarled. Bring the girl and the transfer codes to the abandoned shipyard in Red Hook. 1 minute late, and I start mailing your best friend back to you in very small boxes. The line went dead. He has Chloe because of me. Harper panicked, pacing the kitchen. I have to give him the money. I can reverse the Cayman transfers. Silas caught her arm, pulling her to a stop. No. If you give Victor the money, he kills you both the second the wire clears. We are going to give him a Trojan horse. You'll initiate the transfer, but attach a decryption key to my servers. The moment his financial team accepts the cash, they unknowingly download a massive data packet directly to the FBI. It will expose every front company and offshore account he owns. For the next hour, Harper worked with manic desperation, coding the financial trap alongside Leo. She was no longer just an innocent analyst. She was an active participant in a Mafia war. At exactly noon, Silas's armored SUVs rolled into the desolate, rusting shipyard in Red Hook. The air smelled of salt and imminent violence. Harper sat beside Silas, a heavy Kevlar vest strapped tightly over her chest, clutching a secure tablet. Outside, 30 of Victor's heavily armed men surrounded the courtyard. Victor Volkov stood in the center, holding a bruised Chloe by the hair, a silver pistol pressed directly to her temple. Bring me the girl and the pad, Victor shouted over the wind. Silas stepped out first, hands raised in a mock gesture of peace. Tommy and a dozen of Silas's men fanned out, their assault rifles locked and ready. Harper stepped out slowly behind him, her legs feeling like lead. Let her go, Victor, Silas demanded, his voice carrying effortlessly. We have your money. But the girl walks toward us first, Victor sneered, shoving Chloe forward. She stumbled, sobbing hysterically, and sprinted into Tommy's protective arms. The pad, Castellano, Victor demanded. Harper stepped forward, her hands trembling violently. With one tap, she initiated the transfer. It's done. Accept the deposit. Victor pulled a phone from his pocket, dialing his banker. Is it there? He paused, a cruel smile spreading. Excellent. Kill them all. Before a single trigger could be pulled, the deafening wail of sirens ripped through the air. Black SWAT vans and federal cruisers smashed through the chain-link fences surrounding the entire compound. Victor froze, his phone dropping. What did you do? He screamed at Harper. I gave them everything, Harper yelled back, a fierce adrenaline surging through her veins. Your accounts are frozen. The FBI has your entire ledger. Chaos erupted. The Volkov men dropped their weapons and scattered like rats. Victor, screaming in blind rage, raised his pistol directly toward Harper. A single deafening gunshot rang out. Harper flinched, squeezing her eyes shut. She opened them to see Victor collapsing to the concrete, a dark pool of crimson expanding across his chest. Beside her, Silas lowered his smoking handgun. I told you, Silas breathed, pulling Harper fiercely into his chest. No one touches what is mine. As arranged by Silas's deep-pocketed lawyers, his men quietly slipped away before the feds secured the perimeter. The Volkov syndicate was completely dismantled by sunset. That evening, back in the secure luxury of the Alpine estate, Harper stood on the balcony overlooking the dark forest. Chloe was safe, resting downstairs, and Richard Sterling's mess was permanently erased. Silas stepped out, wrapping a heavy cashmere blanket over her shivering shoulders. He pulled her back against his chest. "Your old life is gone, Harper," he said softly, kissing the crown of her head. There is no going back to the cubicle. Harper leaned into his warmth. She had kissed a dangerous man on a dare, and it had cost her her normal life. But as Silas's powerful arms held her tight, grounding her in this thrilling new reality, she realized she didn't want her old life back. "I know," Harper whispered, turning to look up into his dark, devoted eyes. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Did Harper make the ultimate mistake, or did that one drunken dare lead her to the protective arms of her terrifying soulmate? Sometimes, the most dangerous risks yield the most intoxicating rewards. If you loved this wild Mafia romance and want to hear more thrilling, real-life drama stories, hit that like button, share this with a friend who loves a good plot twist, and subscribe to our channel for more.